Bills. Let's see. We are recording, so we know that. And as far as I know, we are streaming on YouTube, so everybody needs to know that. Everybody, all members of the zoning board that are participating, we are participating remotely. That would be myself. That would be Mr. Baker Senior. That would be Mr. Stephen Galley. That would be Mr. Baker Jr. And Grego was here. Oh, here he comes. So he's definitely participating remotely. So give him a few seconds to just pop in, and then I'm sure Mr. Baker Senior will make the motion to open the public to open the public meeting. Come on, Gregor. There he is. All right, Mr. Baker Senior.
Yes.
You're gonna make the motion to open the meeting.
Motion to open the meeting.
Second.
Second. Roll call. Myself is a yes. Mr. Baker Senior.
Yes.
Mr. Baker Jr.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Galley.
Yes.
Gregor. Greg. Oh. Greg. Can't hear you, sir. Are you in favor of opening the meeting? I see I see you shaking your head, so he's in favor too. I know this is kind of like a little more informal than we're used to, so let me just read the notices hereby given that a virtual remote public meeting will be held at 7:30 p.m. on February 6, 2024 by the Rockland Zoning Board of Appeals. The purpose of the meeting is for discussion of potential changes to the town of Rockland zoning bylaws at the 2024 annual town meeting as follows. And I'm not going to read it. It's not worth it because we have Allison Quinn, Rockland town planner. She's here to talk to us about a couple of zoning changes. And with that, Allison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Rosa. I have a little dog that I missed all day, so he's kind of barking in the background, so pardon any disruptions momentarily.
All good.
So thank you for letting me come tonight and go over the potential amendments to the Town of Rockland zoning code. There are two that we're going to be discussing tonight, one more in depth than the other, generally because I have been working on this for quite some time, so I have more information to share with you. So this is a map of the MBTA communities. Can everyone see this okay? Everyone's got no problem seeing the screen. You should see a map. It shows rapid transit, commuter rail, adjacent community, and adjacent small town. And the reason that it is color-coded this way is because that is how the state has determined each of these municipalities to correlate with how they're thinking about access to public transportation. So I'm going to try and go down to our next slide. Uh-oh. Okay. Can everyone see that one?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I just wanted to give you some background on what the MBTA community law is and why we're going through this exercise this evening. It comes from the Housing Choice Initiative back in 2021. It requires that all MBTA communities become compliant with this. We are an adjacent community, so that means that our deadline is this December 31st to have this adopted at town meeting. The purposes, they're stated there, address the state's housing crisis, encourage multifamily housing development, and boost the housing supply. These are the basic requirements of the state law. You have to have at least 15 units per acre of multifamily as of right. And so if anyone did have the opportunity to look through that draft zoning, the authority in this case is the planning board because it has to be as of right. The only regulatory teeth that the town of Rockland really has is through the site plan approval process. So that we cannot have any age restrictions, limits on unit size, number of size bedrooms, or number of occupants. The intent of this zoning was to keep multifamily residential within some kind of proximity to public transportation. It is not one size fits all. And so, for an adjacent community, it's really thinking about, what is the spirit of the MBTA zoning, and how does a town like Rockland make space for this type of zoning that won't have such a negative impact on the existing housing stock. And so, any questions so far? Should I ask? Anyone concerns, questions? No? Well, that's refreshing. So this is also part of that requirement that I just spoke of. At least half the district must be contiguous parcels. In most cases, they want at least 5 acres of contiguous parcels. There must be a minimum zoned capacity, and the lesser of 50 acres or 1.5% of the community's developable land has to be used. And this slide really helps people understand what zone capacity is. There's limited to vacant land, requires no construction and concern with existing units. This would not fit into that framework. They're not concerned with their highest and best use. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. The zone capacity is the number of units that could be permitted across a district by right. And so that's, again, what I was talking about. We have to use site plan approval for the granting authority in this new district.
Good.
Rockland is required to have a minimum of 750 new units of housing zoned in this district. Okay, so the law does not require new housing development. It does not require communities to pay for infrastructure to support housing development. It does not override the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act or Title V, and it does not provide options for waivers or exemptions. So this is not similar to like the 40B that we've all been, subject to, multiple municipalities. That having been said, it is tied to many municipalities' lack of ability to achieve that minimum 10% requirement that the state does mandate through 40A, that you have at least 10% of your total housing stock set aside as subsidized. We're not the only municipality that's challenged to meet that threshold, but this is in response to literally decades long of that battle with several towns trying to meet that minimum threshold. I wanted to share with you the impact of noncompliance on 3A. So there are 3 big grant opportunities to think about, but then there are umbrella kind of categories under that feed up to these bigger 3. The 3 are the Community One Stop for Growth. It used to be MassWorks, and it used to actually capture a whole bunch of other grants. The state changed to Community for One Stop, I think back in like 2017 or 18. So rather than having the ability to apply for grants different times during the year, they kind of have it all under this one opportunity where you get more feedback from the state. But on I guess the flip side of that is you only have one shot to capture that. So that is one of the grants you will not be able to qualify for. Housing Choice is another one, and local capital project funds. You will not get any state funding, matching grants, or otherwise. And so if you can see, this is a little bit more of an expansive list. These are all of the grants that fall under those 3 umbrella categories that were on the previous sheet. There are 13 of them. It is extensive, and it is grants that most municipalities rely on.
Hey,
So
Allison, could I jump in on one thing?
Of course you can.
On that one topic, just so the board is aware, if a community doesn't adopt this zoning, the Attorney General's office has notified communities that didn't meet their threshold steps towards adoption, that they're contemplating legal action under the Fair Housing Act for noncompliance. And there is a separate group of nonprofit lawyers, I think they're called Lawyers Concerned for Civil Rights, that has actually sent kind of cease and desist or threatening notes that they intend to bring suits to the extent that they can to require towns to adopt these measures. There's a lot of good reasons to adopt it, but those are two other reasons that weren't in Allison's slides that I'm familiar with because I've seen the letters, not one directed to Rockland, but to another community that I'm involved in. And I'm sorry for interrupting. I just wanted the ZBA to be aware of that.
No, that's really helpful, Bob. I appreciate you that you did chime in. To my earlier point of years of towns not being compliant with that 10% set aside, I think that the Attorney General's office feels really confident that she has standing to, pursue any legal action she can against the towns that choose not to adopt it. And it's one of those questions that, I've heard a lot of back and forth. I've participated in some discussions with other planners. I've heard other communities that are facing, these types of townwide meeting votes that need to pass for compliance. And a lot of folks are asking, why do we have to do this? What do we get out of it? I guess a bigger question that we should be asking ourselves is why not? What is the rationale for not creating housing? What is the rationale for not complying with the state law? And so with that, I'll just kind of move on and go through how Rockland actually fits into this framework.
Yeah, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, may I just ask a couple of questions on what was just presented?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you. Bob, does the legislation provide for private enforcement?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Sorry.
It does not provide for private enforcement, but the Attorney General's office has signaled that they are willing to jump in and enforce. There may be some significant offenses to private enforcement, but the legislation does not authorize private enforcement.
Okay. So there may be a limitation or a prohibition on these public interest groups to try to enforce the provisions of the statute.
No one has tested it yet. So,
and this is a more of a, well, not a legal question, but a news question. It's my understanding that the town of Milton has decided to fight this. And one of the responses that they've given to the Attorney General's position of doing everything that she can to force compliance is that she would be grossly exceeding her authority, both under the statute and as Attorney General. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I know a little bit about East Milton because I've been involved in some 40B projects up there, mostly on behalf of abutters. Just, I think at one point Milton had 7 projects pending in front of them at one point. You were only required to have 3 pending projects in public hearings at one time, but as one came off, another one came in. What you see in Milton is apparently there's a petition, citizens petition article that's got on a ballot, and they're seeking to rescind a MBTA community's compliant housing bylaw. And I don't know if it's been voted on yet, but it's coming up soon. Is that true, Allison? I just don't know whether it's been voted on yet.
Their vote is the 13th.
Okay. So I don't know what's going to end up happening, but, Milton has got a lot of attention probably because of the citizens petition. And Milton might be one of the first towns that finds out what happens when you don't adopt it. Now, I think Milton is a little different from Rockland, not only because of its proximity to the city, but it's also because I think Milton is an MBTA community with a train station in it. So I know they have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they have buses as well.
They do.
So,
But my point is, in addressing the Milton situation, is one of the responses that proponents of the petition have made, essentially to challenge the threats that the Attorney General is making as exceeding either her authority as Attorney General, anything that could reasonably be brought.
and I've heard that argument too, and it seems kind of weird where a town has been ordered to do something, and you're not given the funds in order to be able to do that. You sometimes hear it called an unfunded mandate.
Yes.
Those are fascinating theoretical debates for lawyers that want to get paid lots of money to find out. But I think we're trying to avoid that type of a debate here.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you, Allison.
Okay, thanks, Bob. So this really is just, where we fall within, the definitions of MBTA communities and, what that means for Rockland. It is a minimum area of 47 acres. The yield, the unit count yield has to be a minimum of 726, and the minimum gross unit density has to be 15 per acre. Let me see if I can get us to the next slide. Okay. So after some conversations with the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, this space has been identified as the area that Rockland will be pursuing to become compliant with the 3A zoning requirements. The rationale behind this decision because there's a concentration of underutilized congruous parcels. Right next to it is the MBTA park and ride. Right next to, on the other side of that park and ride, is the on-ramp to Route 3. It minimizes the impact on existing residential uses, and the capacity for growth with an opportunity for revenue kind of exists in this area. You guys have all been here, much longer than I have. This is roughly about, I haven't been able to look at it side by side, but it's about 35% of what the total area of that original Gmod proposal had been up in this area. We think, with the support of the planning board, that this is a great fit for becoming compliant. This slide really just shows, our draft of our dimensional regulations and some of the residential uses and commercial uses that were included in the draft zoning language that was forwarded to you for your review. Some of that might be subject to change. I did circulate one that has a little bit of variations in building height, but taking down a little bit of off the top of what could be used, on top of it for mechanicals and the like. And we can talk about that. I'll be in front of you again with the same conversation. I wanted to throw in a little bit of data because of the zoning requirement and because of the population that in my opinion, and there's data to back it up, are the type of folks who are looking to kind of live in mixed use spaces are your millennials and your Gen Zers. And one good example of this that I can point to is when I first was onboarded in Rockland, we had a couple of younger Rockland residents come in, and they really wanted to look for a space where they could, do their thing with art and live. And, there wasn't enough spaces like that in Rockland. I think you guys have some artist studios that are just for commercial use that are existing, and they're at capacity. So they're wildly popular in Rockland, but we don't have enough to hold the people who grew up in Rockland and want to stay in Rockland. So that's, did a little bit of digging. This is kind of where I got some information that might be helpful for a little bit more context. And And this next slide really talks about what it is that I feel that the MBTA zoning in Rockland could be capturing, and it's kind of that missing middle. There are a lot of single families, there are a lot of two families. This kind of, but you're not an urban core, you're too far away. That would be wildly inappropriate for Rockland. So these kinds of, no more than, 18 units per building kind of capture, in between that low level residential unit to that higher module of density that, you see closer to the closer you get to the city, like the Braintrees, like the Quincy's, and in some parts of Weymouth now. So this is kind of that in between. And this slide really just talks about the potential financial impact that this project could yield. The total district in acreage, at build out, if then that's, assuming that how we have the model built now, you could potentially see a net tax increase of 2.568 million. If we only looked at the A.W. Perry undeveloped land, which is really the bulk of what is undeveloped up there, you're looking at 932,000. I think all of those numbers are significant for Rockland. And then this is the final slide. It's one of my favorites. I've used it before, but it really kind of shows folks, this diagram really says, the thing that I hear all the time in the public realm is, I want stable public service and public good. I want my trash picked up. I want my streets cleaned. I want to be able to send my kids to a safe public school. I don't want my taxes to be raised. And I don't want any more density, meaning we don't want to add any more zone capacity to the town's zoning bylaws. And this really breaks it down. So if you want stable services and you want low density, you are going to have higher taxes. If you want low taxes and you want stable services, you have to have more density. If you want low taxes and you want low density, you're going to have service cuts. And this one in the middle really kind of highlights, like, if you want all of these things, that doesn't really exist. That's not a path forward for any of the things that folks say that they want. And so that's why I include this slide. Are there any questions?
Yeah, if I could, it's my understanding this, whatever is built or developed or created will all be market rate, correct?
No. There will be a 10% set aside required affordable housing.
Is that part of the statute or is that local option?
It's both. So you can go above that, but I think the 10% is the minimum requirement. We chose 10% because, we went a little bit beyond that minimum threshold. This area, it does have some challenges. There's like a wet zone in the front area. We have no water and sewer capacity really to speak of to offer over. So a lot of things and able to do any kind of build out at all will require, some other types of, work on site, including septics. And because of that, we also wanted to maintain at least 50% of the parcels remain open space. You don't want big buildings and everything to be, impervious surface. So, the 10% was at a a point where we felt like was adaptable to the market. So you could get something built without, people crying about having too much affordability or not enough affordability, if that's helpful.
Okay, so the 10%, is that defined as affordable in the same way that 40B is defined as affordable, or are there two different definitions?
I think I'll have to look back through it. I think that we had to stick with the definition that was put forward by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, but let me double check on that.
Okay, so it
Yeah, they have to be someone that's earning 80% of the area median income for rentals. and someone that's earning not more than 70% of the median income for condominium units, or
Thanks, Bob.
And
Yeah.
Bob, how does that compare to 40B?
it's identical.
It is, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And,
You know,
and any,
communities are always able to make that number a lesser number, but that's the minimum, or that's the maximum incomes you can have in order to be considered affordable.
and any affordable units that are created under 40A, are they counted toward the requirement for 40B?
Yes.
They are,
Yes.
okay. Good.
But
Thank you.
remember, when you add only 10% and you're talking about a for sale project, you're actually getting further behind.
Yeah. So in a sense, these are two pieces of legislation that are competing with each other.
Yeah, they have different goals and objectives. You know, as we've kind of talked about in our public hearings on other projects, you know, the best scenario for us is an apartment complex offered under Chapter 40B, assuming we can find them water and sewer, because all of the units count, not just the affordable units. And that gets us, you know, much closer to or over our thresholds.
Okay, thank you.
Fair question.
Gally.
Sorry. You say it was okay to talk?
Yeah, no, please, no, raise your
Thanks.
hand, ask the question.
Real question to piggyback on the question about the 40B versus the MUD. So are you saying that if we get some affordable units in the MUD district, it wouldn't count towards the 40B goals and requirements?
No, they count. Okay, they get added to our subsidizing housing inventory. But if we continue to develop the town with housing that is not affordable, when the next census comes up, it could affect our ability to remain on the subsidized housing inventory.
Okay. I got more questions and about rental versus condo. Is the town able to just like dictate that it be condos instead of rentals?
No.
No.
As a matter of fact, regardless of whether it's a 40B project or a conventional project, we're not allowed to dictate the form of ownership.
Okay. All right. And I don't remember if I read it or heard it, but I know you showed up, we saw the map of the suggested zone.
Sure.
Does the zone have to be within a certain proximity of like the actual mass transit? Or is that just the suggested zone? Just, you know, I mean, that was like, or, you know what I mean? Like, did it have to be there? Or is that just, you know, that was the most fitting spot that you found for a single zone?
So for adjacent communities, you know, essentially, you know, you can't be because you don't, you know, you're limited in how much, you know, proximity you have to certain types of public transportation. We had two options on the table. The first one was down, you know, where you guys rezoned for your 40R district, the Union Main Street area.
Yeah.
Whether you have that it's like the P&B transit, the bus that goes through. So that was an option that was on the table. The challenges that I think ultimately got fleshed out through the conversations with the planning board were because they have yet to have an actual 40R project completed. They have one that's come forward that they've been working with that is, you know, very soon going to be putting a formal application in. But the concern was that the 40R requires 20 to 25% affordability. And if we wrapped it, you know, so if you took this MBTA zoning and wrapped it around that original 40R, you jeopardize the 40R because more people may opt to go with the less affordable requirement. And then the nature of why you guys adopted the 40R gets diluted and lost in that process. So I think this is why the planning board opted to kind of create a newer district up by the park and ride and close to 3A itself, because it was another option, but it made more sense rather than jeopardize the existing 40R and keeping it, a little bit higher of a dense area closer to where there's not a lot of, small residential sub-districts right now. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and just a little question.
Sure.
Does the mud district does it have to be a single like contiguous district? I mean, just not to object to its location, but if for any reason you thought we should have 50% over here and 50% at another area of the town, would that have been acceptable to meet the requirement? Just curious.
I think as long as you had a minimum of 5 acres of contiguous land
Yep.
area, you would have been fine. I think the appealing part of this area is that these parcels are bigger.
Yeah.
And then you're not having that problem of, upzoning and having people, trying to like buy up all these a bunch of small parcels to assemble to do a bigger project. It was kind of built in over here. These are oversized, underutilized parcels.
Yeah, I can see the advantage of the location. I was just curious. That was all that was that question.
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question.
Thank you. All right, that's all I had to bug you for now.
Sounds good, sir. Allison, back to you.
So that was my last slide, my favorite slide about, no one wants to do anything and this is what happens when you don't. Really, that the language is there. I'll probably have some tweaking that will happen in between now and the February 27th, public hearing before the planning board. I would love to come back again and, talk through this a little bit more with you guys as we get, closer to, the final version of this. I'm always happy to take phone calls, emails, however you want to contact me with questions, concerns, issues. I'm available all the time and I really welcome feedback. So if you don't have a question on the tip of your tongue right now, you can always contact me later.
Uh-oh, Mr. Baker Senior, he's waving his hand.
Couple of questions. Who drew up all these bylaws and stuff? Was it the MBTA or was it the town?
So the draft zoning that I forwarded to you for the town of Rockland?
Yeah, no, all this MBTA commuter mixed use development district amendments. Who drew all them up?
So that was a combination of several things. So we worked with a consultant, Judy Barrett. She's fantastic. She's worked with several municipalities. I've worked with her previously.
She's worked for our board on the shingle mill project.
Yes.
So she drafted it, and we've been working with her to tweak it where we felt we needed to tweak it. And of course, Attorney Galvin was very helpful in putting together the actual legal final draft because he's just better at that than I am.
I have a couple of things in this. Under the density and dimension regulations,
Let me just pull that slide up.
the table,
Yep.
rear setback is only 10 feet.
Rear setback. Yeah. I think it says 15 on here, but I think we did change it till 10 to 10.
Why would we change it to 10 when the rest of the town is 50?
This is much different than the rest of the town. We're trying to accommodate, at least 754 units up there. That setback is very consistent with the type of housing, mixed use that we're trying to build. This is not, an R1, an R2, or an R3. If you looked at your 40R district, you do not have a 50-foot rear setback for that zoning. And so this is more like those downtown districts than it is, you know.
Allison, I can jump in too.
Okay.
Bob, if we were to hold those setbacks that are in the other residential districts, would never be able to come up with the minimum required density that the MBT communities bylaw requires. You know, this act was passed to force the towns, particularly the suburban towns, to create areas in town with very significant density by right, because there is a view that there's a housing crisis and a lack of affordable housing. And all of those requirements that the towns like Rockland and many other South Shore communities, many other Metro West communities and North, they'll have these restrictions that basically prevent multifamily housing development from being proposed. So unless we waiver that to the amount that Allison has described, we won't be able to come up with the sufficient amount of units to comply with the new law.
Okay. And then right under that, there's a exemptions B. The planning board can waive the minimum side setback to 0 lot line.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer it? I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
I mean, if you want me to answer it, I mean, if you think of some of the communities in the city or in Cambridge or in Somerville where there are multifamily housing, it's not uncommon to have units that actually share a party wall, they're called. It's a common wall between buildings. And if you come up with a appropriate type of development and you can ensure that the buildings are properly sprinklered and things of that nature, it's possible sometimes to connect a couple of buildings so that you have adequate density. And that's, in an appropriate circumstance, that could be waived in this case. But, you know, we'd have to see what it looks like, and we'd have to see whether the fire department felt it impeded access and things like that. But that's why it exists.
One other question, Bob. All of the things in here, it says that the unless waived by the planning board. Is the planning board going to be the zoning enforcement or the zoning board for these?
No. The gist of this whole bylaw, Bob, is that multifamily housing is going to be allowed by right. And all they have to do is comply with the specific dimensional requirements, and then they get to develop it. In certain circumstances where they look to vary from what was required, then they might have to seek some waivers from the planning board. Did I get that right, Allison?
Yes, no, that's true.
Because most of this in here looks like the same proposal that A.W. Perry put in a couple of years ago to have all these dimensional variances, dimensional things reduced drastically. And a lot of this wordage in here is almost the same as his proposal. And
So I can tell you this was generated as a result of the law change, not because of A.W. Perry. Their land happens to be the probably the optimum type of location to have this, but this was not developed as a result of A.W. Perry's requirements. And if I was to show you the same bylaw in Marshfield or in Norwell, and you looked at them, you would see that they're very, very similar to this bylaw. They're not identical because every communities are slightly different, but it is not the A.W. Perry project. But you will notice some similarities in density because that's exactly what they wanted. The problem is it wasn't offered at a time when this was a requirement for the town to adopt it. And the only way we'll actually be able to do this is to have those densities and those heights and those setbacks.
one last question, if I may. Do you think that if this is passed and a developer in another part of town comes in and wants to build it, apartments or condos or whatever, that they could fight us in court over the lot lines and stuff and the
No.
density?
No, because actually what this does is confirms that it's okay for us to have outside of these areas specific zoning requirements. And we're only obligated to do this in a very small portion of the town. It's actually an affirmation that we're allowed to have our zoning in other parts of the town undisturbed.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Rob. Thank you very much.
Yo,
Rob, I've got a
Yes.
question for Attorney Galvin. How do we build this out without sewer? We're under,
You can't.
so it kind of sounds like, imaginary planning. I mean,
Well, Greg,
people come up with like,
the only thing I can suggest to you is obviously the town will at some point address its sewer needs. Okay. When that's going to be, I don't have an answer to that question. There's always the possibility that someone could get a groundwater discharge permit, depending on the location, and discharge in a private subsurface sewage disposal system that is compliant with Title V regulations. But we would still have to have water. And I think we have two issues in Rockland. One is sewer and one is water. If we don't have sewer capacity, someone might be able to come in with their own proposed septic system design on site or in a wastewater treatment plant. But water is a different issue. And I think we know from Shingle Mill that we didn't have enough potable water, and that's why they were studying whether they could come up with their own water. So it's twofold. And yes, maybe as a result of those issues in Rockland, it seems maybe a little bit theoretical. But the one thing that isn't theoretical is if we don't pass this bylaw, we lose important sources of grant revenue, which we've benefited from, and we'll probably need to deal with sewer. And because one of the big things that you spend Mass Works grant money on is sewer infrastructure. And we're going to want that, or else the price tag will be astronomically more.
We'll have to sell it now.
Did that answer your question, Gregor?
yeah. One other question. How does the, is there a lottery for these affordable housing like in the 40B, or does the state just put illegals in there, or what?
No, nothing like that. So in order to qualify for affordable units, you have to come up with a marketing plan that has to be approved by the state. And sometimes they're also looked at by me. You choose a marketing agent and they come up with income requirements, and then they do a lottery. But, you wouldn't be eligible if you weren't here lawfully to do that at this stage. I don't know what happens in the future.
Stage, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Gally, I saw you raising your hand. Did you have another question?
Yeah, I do have a question. First, I'm going to make one comment. I would appreciate that if we talk about affordable housing, we don't mention immigration status, especially in a hostile manner. I'm just going to say that out loud. It's pretty offensive. Now, I'm an American citizen, but I do find that offensive. I'm just saying that out loud right now. Now, we were talking about sewer and water, and you answered that question in my mind. So I was concerned about that. The idea, but I'm thinking that one thing we were explaining, that if we do not approve this district, we will basically forego our ability to get some sort of grants in the, in the future automatically. Now, I don't know if that resets, if we can, approve this kind of, bylaw again and then apply, be approved for it the next year. But I just want to double check. Say we approve it, but our water restrictions and our sewer restrictions don't allow the approval of certain construction. Does non-compliance, because we just don't have the sewer and water capacity, put us in legal danger? Or is that just something we don't know because you don't know the future?
No legal danger at all.
Thank you. That's all I have to say at this moment. It's my only questions. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to mute myself.
Mr. Baker Jr.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting the slide that indicated the estimate of increased tax revenue were this project to be developed. Have any estimates been developed to contemplate the increased cost generated by the increased population as far as cost of schools, police, fire, public works, that sort of thing?
We have not been able to do that yet. I just got this back this morning. So one of the things that we will be trying to look at is that broader picture of, overall impact to the town of Rockland. That's an important question, and it's an important piece of, what zoning change looks like. So we hope to have something a little bit more solid in the near future.
Okay. But it is certainly possible that when the numbers are in, the increased cost could far outstrip the increased revenue.
I'm not, an expert on, public safety. I'll say this, these units aren't, a lot of times I've heard people concerned about, the impacts on, the tax base. Mixed use with, multifamily, that's really going to probably have a significant number of studios, 1-bedrooms, and maybe a handful of 2-bedrooms. This law discourages you from, not allowing families to move in. But, as someone who is in more of an urban environment, full time, I live in the city. These types of multifamilies tend to not attract larger family sizes. They attract first-time home buyers, people who are single, people who are just coupled. They attract, people who are trying to downsize and want to have a walkable community. I don't know if there'd be per se a lot of stress on the public school system. I will have to inquire generally about, we'll be looking at other models and other places to understand, that real data number. And I will be working with the fire department and the police department to get a better understanding of, how they would view the impact on the public safety of resources in Rockland.
Well, I mean, if we're looking at potentially 750 units, if even half of those units had one child, we're looking at almost 400 new students into the Rockland Public School.
Yeah, that's true. You also get, my understanding is you also get state revenue for every child that comes into the school system. So I think balancing, working with the public school administrators to understand like what that really looks like on paper will help us tell a better picture.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's also helpful to note that the state doesn't have a lot of tolerance for the argument that there's an impact on schools because it is also viewed as having a discriminatory impact against families with children. So, which is an essential element of the Fair Housing Act. So it's hard to do those analysis, even though I think it's undeniable that a project of this size will have some impact in means of enrollment increases in our schools. I will tell you, outside of the city, many schools have seen a decline in enrollment as a result of families having smaller, husband and wives having smaller families. And the opposite is true in inner city schools. I happen to know one because I represent the Everett School Committee, and we have an increase in the number of school children in Everett because the housing is probably more affordable. 85% of the students that attend Everett Public Schools, I think, are minority students. It's just a different world in the city than it is in the suburbs. But I only just wanted to mention to you, we can't really look at it as a negative, okay? And we can't really examine something that will have an adverse impact on families with children.
I was using the schools just as an example.
No. I'm just,
There are costs that would be spread
suggesting
across
that you
the
were,
municipal.
yeah, and I'm not suggesting you were asking anything improper in any way, shape, or form. It's just kind of using this as an opportunity to explain how the Housing Appeals Committee and other state agencies look at restrictions on housing, or when it's designed not to be available to families with children.
And I'm assuming I'm correct that there is nothing that would prevent the legislature in the future, should they so desire, to increase the minimum required acreage and the minimum required units. Is that correct?
Yep, I agree. This legislation could be amended, which will give the towns the latitude to change their MBTA communities bylaws.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of, right now we're talking, 47 acres and approximately 750 units. So at some point in the future, the legislature could say, oh, you're now required to be at 94 acres and 1,500 units.
I think they could make that I think they could make those requirements more tedious on the towns, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
Bob, I had one more question, quick one.
Go for it.
Allison, do you think that if this project ever is built out, that these roads in there would be presented to the town to be accepted as town roads?
That's a good question. I think that, the highway department would have to, kind of have a little bit of a, stake in that.
I can take a crack at it, Allison, because I
Okay.
know what the process is. So, first of all, anyone could come in and petition the town as a citizen and ask that their streets be taken and become public ways. That we have a process that requires an evaluation by the highway director, and he has to determine that the roadway has sufficiency. The planning board gets involved, and in some cases where the roadways are not built to certain specifications and don't have certain elements, in all likelihood, the planning board or the highway director would say, absolutely no, these roads are not sufficient. And they might come back and say, well, if you want us to take it, we need X, Y, and Z to be done these roads. And we could then give a betterment so the roadway is better. In all likelihood, these roads are not going to be as, how do I say it? They're probably not going to meet some of our roadway standards under our subdivision bylaws. And as a result, it would be unlikely that these roads would be accepted. I think that it's more likely that these roadways will be private, open to the public, meaning the public can use them, but they'll remain in private ownership, maintained by whatever entity continues to manage the properties.
Thank you.
Anybody else? That's it.
Okay, but we got to go to executive session though.
Well, no, we had a couple more things that we wanted to, I think, Allison, I think you can do them quickly.
Sure. So the other quick bylaw change that's going to be happening at town meeting is the update to the flood maps. And I hoping that you got forwarded the maps and the draft article language. If not, I will get it over to you. Please bear with me. We do not have GIS, and FEMA doesn't actually like let me look it up on their maps yet because we haven't adopted it. So I'm working on a way to better communicate this to you visually, and I will send that along as soon as I can. But I did want to flag it for you to let you know that that is another thing that will be coming up at town meeting in May.
Did that
Yeah.
did that link to the viewer I sent you, did that work?
It didn't. It still, I was still struggling to get it like to Rockland and to the actual, trying to break it down to match up those, you know how they sent us panels
Yep.
of the areas? I couldn't get like an exact match, but I'm gonna figure it out.
I'll find you. We'll
Okay.
work it out. I figured it out, so we
Oh,
can
all
figure
right.
that out. There was one other thing that the host community agreement.
Oh, yes. So another change.
We'd
to-
already talked, not to interrupt, but we'd already talked about it, you know, just
Okay.
taking that paragraph out, about the host community agreement. Everybody remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, we can't collect it anymore, so it should come out of the zoning.
Yeah, we'd already talked about that, so that was a quick one.
All right.
All right, we got 4 minutes. Is there anything else you want to talk about? That's coming to Allison. You were the.
Oh,
you were the
okay.
big- you're the
No,
big, you're the guest speaker tonight, so.
All right, well, that's, again, please reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer anything to the best of my ability, and if I don't have an answer, I will find you one. And I appreciate your time tonight. It's great, you know, to kind of get a broader understanding of the types of questions that will come forward in the public realm. Gives me opportunity to kind of think through more appropriate responses. And I want to, again, thank Bob Galvin for always kind of being the quiet champion in the background, helping answer questions that are a little bit vague from my perspective. And with that, I will hand it back over to you guys so you can start your executive session.
And the best part about this MBTA community stuff, we don't have to touch it. This is back in the planning board. Let them have it. Let them have it. I'm happy to not have another thing on our plate. So with that, we can adjourn. I would entertain a motion.
No,
Bob,
no,
we
no,
we
you
not
get,
about the other ones?
you get executive session.
Yeah, but it's a different Zoom link.
Oh, okay. Someone's gonna have to make sure I have that because I don't think I have the different Zoom link.
Oh,
Well, I get again, and we're not coming back to this, so I'm assuming that
Okay,
we're adjourning,
so
signing out.
technically you're not adjourning from your meeting.
Oh,
You're
okay.
closing the open meeting, okay, and you're gonna do a motion in this meeting to go into executive session while you're still public.
Senior,
Motion to close the public portion of tonight's meeting and go into executive session.
For the
Second.
purposes
For
of
discussions of-
discussing pending litigation
Pending litigation,
and not
Okay.
to return to open session.
not to return to open session.
anything else we want to add to that? I'll say no. Do we have a second?
Can someone text me the other Zoom link?
same here, please.
Oh, Deb, do you have everyone's, you know, phone numbers?
I'll send the email. I'll email it to everybody, the link.
I
I
have
would
it.
give it,
Okay.
all right, I would give it like 5 minutes. I just texted Chris to set up that link.
Okay.
You know what, can we put it up on the screen while we're still
Nope.
here? No?
No.
No.
All right.
No executive session.
I'll email it and that will be the link. Just wait until like you're allowed in it. It may just spin for a few minutes.
Yeah,
All
he's
right.
got to start it up. So I've got a motion. We got a second.
Second,
I got a second. All in favor? Myself, yes. Mr. Baker Senior,
Yes.
Mr. Galley,
Yes.
Mr. Tanzi,
Yes.
Mr. Baker Jr.
yes.
Get out of here.
All right, I'll email that now.
See
Later.
everybody in a